Pope Francis has passed away at the age of 88. The Vatican has announced that the Pontiff died at his residence. According to a statement by the Vatican, the Pope died at 7:35 local time on Monday. Pope Francis, the 267th head of the Catholic Church, was unwell for a long period of time. He was hospitalized for 5 weeks in hospital for pneumonia in both lungs. He spent 38 days in hospital before he was released on March 23rd.
Carissimi fratelli e sorelle.
Dear brothers and sisters, with deep sorrow I must announce the death of our Holy Father Francis. At 7:35 this morning, the Bishop of Rome, Francis, returned to the house of the Father. His entire life was dedicated to the service of the Lord and His Church. He taught us to live the values of the Gospel with fidelity, courage, and universal love, especially toward the poorest and most marginalized. With immense gratitude for his example as a true disciple of the Lord Jesus, we commend the soul of Pope Francis to the infinite merciful love of the triune God.
On Sunday, Pope Francis greeted crowds at the Easter Sunday service. He appeared at the Vatican's St. Peter's Square to wish Happy Easter to thousands of worshippers, and after the blessing, the Pope was driven around the square. As he passed through the crowds, his procession paused a number of times as babies were brought over to him to bless. His traditional Easter address was delivered by a clergy member. He was the first Pope from the Americas and the Southern Hemisphere, dubbed the People's Pope. The Pontiff loved being among his flock and was popular with the faithful, though he faced bitter opposition from traditionalists within the Church. He became the first Pope to take the name Francis after Saint Francis of Assisi. The football-loving former Archbishop of Buenos Aires was also more accessible than his predecessors. Pope Francis, who is from Argentina, suffered a number of health issues throughout his life, from colon surgery in 2021 and a hernia in June 2023 to bouts of bronchitis and knee pain that forced him to use a wheelchair. His fourth hospitalization of more than a month for bronchitis in both lungs was his longest, raising speculation he might step down. But he brushed off talks of quitting, saying in February 2023 that papal resignations should not become a normal thing.
Tutti costoro che parlano
alla malattia e alla prigionia, tutte realtà.
Per favore, non dimenticatevi di pregare per me. Buon pranzo e arrivederci.
All right, for more on this, with us on the broadcast is James Jackson. He's a journalist and a political analyst with us from Berlin. Also with us is Stefano Virgini. He's a journalist and with us from Rome. Thanks very much for being here. Let me begin by asking you, James, to just lay out for our viewers what this moment is really all about, given the kind of shock and given the kind of messages that we are witnessing coming in from around the world.
Yes, I think for Christian worshippers and especially members of the Catholic Church, which has 1.4 billion members worldwide, this is a very sad day because Pope Francis, as you heard in the report, was very close to the people. He was a reforming Pope. Some would even say a revolutionary Pope who was open on many issues of Catholic doctrine, much more towards the liberal side, as well as taking on hierarchies within the Vatican to make the Catholic Church closer to the people and less of this far-off, distant, rich institution. So when he was elected, throughout his papacy, there have been a number of controversies between him and traditionalists, from where he was more open on doctrine and focus on the message of Jesus Christ, as well as, St. Francis of Assisi, his namesake. And he was, of course, the first Jesuit Pope and the first Pope from outside of Europe since 742, when we had a Syrian Pope. So he was truly representing, for many believers, the future of the Catholic Church, if it is to survive, which is a global institution, not just one in Europe and Rome, as well as one that is more open to a world in which many Catholic traditional doctrines seem out of place even for Catholic believers. He also stressed peace and was a very political pope, mentioning in his last address the suffering of the people of Gaza. He phoned a Catholic church there almost every day, according to reports before his illness, and was a tireless advocate for peace, making him somewhat controversial among political figures in Europe.
Indeed. Let's also get in Stfano onto the conversation. Stfano, as we look at those messages pouring in, the common thread among many aspects being how he was known for his boundless compassion.
Yeah, I mean, this is probably the main memory that we will have about Pope Francis. Over his 12 years in power, he faced criticism from especially conservatives who accused him of basically trashing traditions. On his side, he promoted dialogue and peace dialogue. He tried to be impartial on the war in Ukraine. Probably one of the things for which he will remember is its decision to take the side of the marginalized, such as the migrants. And for these choices, he was harshly criticized by the conservatives. He also made his views known for climate change and for wealth inequality, for the role of women in the Catholic Church, and also for the acceptance of the LGBTQ community that was unprecedented for a pope. Although over the last year he appeared to be more conservative on this kind of issue, he reiterated the Vatican's opposition to surrogacy, abortion, and euthanasia. Nevertheless, he will be remembered, I think, especially for his acceptance of the LGBTQ community views. Now it will be interesting to see what is going to happen. And Francis appointed nearly 80% of the cardinals electors who will choose the next pope. So the possibility that his successor will continue somehow his policies, progressive policies, is quite high. It will be interesting to see who will be elected as the new pope in a situation like the current one, where Donald Trump is in power for the second time in the U.S., and the antagonism between China and the U.S. is increasing, and so is increasing the antagonism between the U.S. and Europe.
Right, Stfano, you're joining us from Rome, and you rightly mentioned that cardinals from around the world are heading to Rome for the conclave as period of intense mourning begins. You also listed out a number of issues that Pope addressed. I want to come back to our guest, James, there. James, my question to you is that how will his legacy be remembered, especially when it comes to his ability to reach out to people, to try and bridge the gap between the orthodox, the conservative spectrum of the society, and against those who were the most reformist section of the society?
Well, I think it's the position of a pope is the head of a church which contains so many different perspectives representing believers and, the message of Christ to the world. So they see themselves as a broad church. I think Francis has been more on the reformist side than any of the popes we've had in my lifetime, at least. Of course, we had Benedict and John Paul II, both conservative counter-reformers to a certain extent following the Vatican I reforms in the 1960s, which liberalized the church massively. And then there was a bit of a conservative counter-revolution, in a sense, with John Paul and his successor, Benedict. And what we saw with Francis was a return to that reforming spirit of Vatican Council I, which did not make him popular with the hierarchies and the conservatives within the church. In fact, sometimes he railed against them. Italy, Rome, of course, a very interesting place, but with a lot of court intrigue, very political church. If you've seen the film Conclave, you might have an understanding of what kind of issues are in store for when it comes to electing a pope. People think about, are we going to have someone from Europe? That's going to be on everyone's lips this time. I think that is something that Francis has changed forever, just from where he was born. We could be looking to potentially Africa for a next pope, or outside of Europe, as well as these questions of doctrine, of how and symbolism as well, how close the Pope can be to people. I mean, Benedict, for example, was very well respected, his predecessor, as an academic, as a theologian, and as an organizer within the church, whereas Pope Francis was very much known for his closeness to the people. And that means that he is especially beloved among Catholic worshippers. And I expect to see a lot of mourning from members of the Catholic Church. People are very sad to hear about this, even though it wasn't a complete surprise, with Pope Francis, of course, being very susceptible to pneumonia due to an operation he had as a young man in Argentina, where part of his lung was removed, also for pneumonia, much earlier in life. So he's been sick. The fact that he's died on Easter Monday, straight after wishing everyone worshippers a happy Easter, on probably the most significant high holiday of the church, I think won't be lost on worshippers, and people will say, he's gone to God.
Right, James. And during his final message, Pope Francis said that no peace without freedom of religion, thought and expression. Please stay with us. We're also being joined by our correspondent, Eric, here. Eric, we have been discussing here about the issues that Pope Francis spoke about. He strongly advocated for the marginalized and addressed climate change, along with the issues of migration and the war in Gaza. The war in Gaza also got a mention during his last final message. My question to you is that, will Pope Francis be seen as a person who is not afraid in mincing his words?
Well, Rahesha, I have to say this is indeed a very trying moment for the world, especially for the Catholic faithful. Most people had to endure a month full of anxiety when the Pontiff was hospitalized for double pneumonia. I have to say, seeing the number of people who adored the Pope and went to visit him at the hospital, even yesterday on Easter Sunday, when the Pope made a short tour of the Vatican Square in his Pope mobile, and the way he would just regularly stop and bless children, toddlers, and the excitement on people's faces to see their Pope. I was on air at that moment, and I have to say I had to take short breaks because I was getting emotional. I was fighting tears because it was very emotional to see this man who's 88-year-old, and he's fighting for his life. He's very weak. You can actually tell that he's very weak, but he had time for his people. This man led with such humility, such kindness. He was 88, like I mentioned. He was weak due to his complications, but he made it a point to serve, to speak, to care, and to love. I think after Pope John Paul II, Pope Francis has climbed the ladder of one of the pontiffs who has left a huge trademark, like our guests are saying there, because the fact is, Pope Francis, despite being conservative, stern, reformist, he was a people's pope. So the next pontiff will have a bigger shoe to fill, in my take, and that's what I would say, because it will be interesting to see if at all Africa will have a chance this time. Catholicism is very big, the continent, Rahesha.
Right, Eric, like you also mentioned, Pope Francis' language and style was perhaps more inclusive to those who might have previously felt shut out by the church. I'm tossing now back to my correspondent, Molly, who's joining us on the show.
Right, thanks for that, Rahesha. As we just summarize for our viewers what the moment is looking like for the world, and as the condolence messages pour in from around the world, let's just take a step back and talk about the way the legacy will be remembered. Stefano, as you were just telling us about the messages that have been coming in, let's also talk about how the legacy of Pope Francis also involves his role as a humble pastor. We also know that he's rejected the tradition of popes having 3 coffins, instead choosing to be buried in just one, made of wood and zinc.
Yeah, this is one of the first things that was highlighted from his papacy. That this is why many conservatives from the beginning accused him of trashing cherished traditions. And this was, and also the choice of his name, Francis, like Francesco d'Assisi, was in this sense a vehement of trying to be very different from the previous Pope, Benedict, who was deemed to be more conservative and more careful of the traditions of the church. But this was not only a matter of symbolism, because in fact Francis tried to be very different also on important issues for the entire society, as the attention to the migrants, which is a big issue in Europe, but also on other issues such as the climate change topic, wealth inequality, and so how society is changing, and the role of women and the role of the LGBTQ community. So all these kind of issues were treated very different from Francis, and I think it will be impossible for the church to go back straight to the previous times. So somehow the changes that Francis has brought on the political scene, talking about the Vatican, will be remembered and will need to be somehow modified, but starting from Francis' stances. So it's somehow something that will not be changed, in my view.
Right. Just hold that thought there, Stefano. Let me also get in James on this point itself. James, as you just heard Stefano talk about the kind of imprint that Pope Francis has left behind, your views on that, and how there is a marked difference in the way we've been talking about the legacy of Pope Francis and the imprint that he's left behind.
I absolutely think that Pope Francis' legacy, as well as being a pope that's involved in politics, as well as being a liberal reformer who took on conservative and orthodox hierarchies within the Vatican, which is not an easy job, as I think everybody can guess from the pushback he received. We're talking about a pope who really knew how to connect with people as a brother, as a father, as a family member, rather than a distant, faraway cardinal overseeing a vast empire. Pope Francis, in his public communications and his interactions with the public, seems like just a normal priest, a parish priest who was close to people. You could see the joy of crowds when they got near him. You could see a crying baby in some of the footage that's been shown on one of his final appearances near. And Pope Francis never shied away from being close to worshippers and to other people, because that's another thing that doctrinally he has pushed for more acceptance of non-traditional Catholics, including, of course, the gay and lesbian LGBTQ community, as well as pushing for reconciliation with the Church of England, the Anglican Church, which is the third largest ecclesiastical body worldwide, and better ties with the Orthodox. So, you know, he was not a Catholic, Roman Catholic firebrand pushing for the supremacy of his church in a divided world. Quite the opposite. Pope Francis, like his namesake, St. Francis of Assisi, was a healer who who wanted to bring people closer together, to heal wounds and fight against injustice, whether that was on the global stage or within the churches, which have, of course, seen very tragically multiple abuse scandals in the last decades and experienced a severe damage to their reputation, not just abuse scandals of child abuse, but also money laundering. So in a sense, he made the church more worldly, but by getting closer to people and not by being wrapped up in sin.
To stay up to speed with the latest news, download the WION app and subscribe to our YouTube channel.